Wherever the Viking traders needed to leave the river and travel over land, local tribes would come together to haul the boats. They would also bring in food and other provisions for the Viking journeymen. At these key locations, new towns began to grow. Many became important trading centers. At a portage site between the Dvina and Dnieper rivers, a Viking town sprang up just outside modern-day Smolensk. Here the traders would stop to repair their ships, buy what they needed for the journey ahead. On the outskirts of the city, archaeologists discovered one of the largest cemeteries dating to the Viking Age, with over 5,000 graves filled with an enormous treasure of silver jewelry. The vast majority of the burials belonged to local Slavs or Balts, but about 100 graves contained Scandinavian artifacts.
The
earliest grave mounds date to the 9th century. And in this part of the field, in one of the grave mounds, we have traced a magnificent way of burying the dead, with the body placed in a riverboat and then set on fire. This is a ceremony typical for the Swedish Vikings, who brought the tradition over to Russia.
This burial ritual was described in chilling detail by an Arab diplomat named Ibn Fadlan, who encountered Viking traders on his journeys through Russia.
One day I heard that an important man among them was dead. His ship had been pulled up onto land and supports were built for it. They carried him into a tent set up on the ship. They sacrificed a dog, horses, and hens, and threw them in the ship. They dressed him in beautiful clothes, and they came with all his weapons laid beside him. His skin had turned all black due to the cold in the country. And they asked his slave girls, "Who wants to die with him?" One girl said yes, and I looked at her, and she looked completely confused. An old woman that was called the Angel of Death now forced the slave girl into the tent where her master lay. The men outside started beating their sticks on their shields so that the sound of her screaming would not be heard, lest the other girls be too frightened to seek death with their masters. The wood they had prepared under the ship was set alight. Then a strong and frightful wind blew up, and before an hour had passed, ship, wood, slave girl, and chieftain had all turned to ashes and then to dust.
The Viking merchants who ventured into Russia were both ruthless and clever. They soon dominated the local tribes of Finns and Slavs. They collected tribute, usually in the form of furs and slaves, and exchanged it with Arab traders for valuable Baghdad silver. The trade networks they built gradually helped unify the eastern lands, once divided by many languages and cultures, into a cohesive unit. Today, most scholars believe that the Rus, who founded Russia, were indeed Vikings.
Прежде всего, само слово «Русь», я думаю,
First of all, the word Rus, and I share this opinion with many historians, originated from the word Rutsi, which means Sweden in Finnish, and from Ros, a word found on Viking runestones, which means rower. The Russian chronicles reveal that Rus, the designation of the Eastern Vikings, referred to the military crew that rowed the ships on which the Viking princes arrived.
The Viking Rus grew rich off the silver trade with Baghdad, but in the late 10th century, the Arab silver mines began to dry up. In search of a new source of wealth, one group of Vikings moved their base to Kiev, then just a small village on the Dnieper River. The Russian Chronicle tells its own dramatic version of the Vikings' arrival in Kiev. According to the story, 2 Viking warriors betrayed their leader and went to Kiev to establish their own kingdom. When their treachery was discovered, another Viking named Oleg sailed to Kiev to destroy them.
And they came to the heights of Kiev. Oleg let his men hide in the longships while he sent for the traitors, saying, "We are merchants from your own country on our way to the Greeks. Come and visit us." When the traitors arrived, Oleg killed them and made Kiev into the mother of all the towns of Russia.
The really interesting question about the move of some of the Vikings down to Kiev is why on earth they bothered. Because the journey down south from Kiev along the river the Dnieper was a very difficult one. There were some mighty cataracts which could very easily wreck their fragile craft.
Kiev was small, but it stood at a strategic point on the Dnieper River, which led to the Black Sea and eventually to the Byzantine Empire. This territory was filled with hostile tribes, and the river itself turned threatening, with rapids and cataracts that the Vikings called Ifor, the always violent. But if the Viking traders could survive this journey, they would launch their boats onto the Black Sea. 500 more miles of sailing, and they would reach their goal, Constantinople, today known as Istanbul.